Have you checked out the new Heavy Gear rules? Because they are awesome. Kill me. Hey, it's about that time of year again. Heavy Gear goes through a couple rules iterations every couple years, and they are in the alpha stages of their new rule set. It is a variation of Blitz, and it looks awesome. Have you guys taken a look at it? Because they have done a lot of things that have tried to streamline the game, and so far it looks absolutely awesome. We're talking about a list construction that has been changed dramatically. So no longer do you need to have a PhD in physics or accounting and like 2 or 3 different little books to be able to put it all together, or just use Gear Garage. Now you can actually show up to the game and just pick a unit card, and it has a flat TV value, and that's it. There's nothing terribly complex. They might get complex in the future, but in the alpha rules right now, it actually looks really nice, and I'm actually really hyped about that, because not only is the unit list creation is considerably easier, it's also the direction that they are taking it is to make all the different factions and units a little bit more feature rich, to give them a little bit more character and flavor. And I am all about that, because that is just so cool. No longer will just a Jaeger and a Hunter be, you know, an analog to each other. They'll be very close, but now you're going to see a little bit more of a doctrinal shift. Yeah, the southern units are going to be a little bit more aggressive, or at least that's what the developer's talking about, because they're going to get things like smoke bombs and stuff like that, or at least smoke grenades are going to be intrinsic to them, so that they'll be a little bit more aggressive. Whereas the Hunter gears, the Hunter is going to be a bit more comm specific. It's going to be a little bit more sophisticated. As a matter of fact, on the forums right now, as of like a couple hours ago when I checked it, they were talking about the differences in the PRDF gears. Exactly what will they do to make them not exactly like a Jaeger or a Hunter, but not make them over TV'd for what they do. And the discussion is fantastic. As a matter of fact, Caprice got a massive revamp, and now they look really cool, because they get this one trait called Brawler, which is something that makes a lot more sense in the alpha rules. I'm breaking it down. There's a lot of new stuff in the alpha rules besides army list creation and an incentive to create more flavorful units that have more character, because that is a problem in the older rules, where you had a lot of units that had a series of abbreviations that may not make a whole lot of sense to the people that are new to the game, that just gets this wall of letters and numbers and, you know, LAC, LRP 32, rugged movement. What the hell does that mean? It means it's just any other unit. It's a trooper gear. And they're going to move away from that. But in the rules, they're going to add a lot of other little bits and flavor. Like I mentioned, Brawler. Brawler is a fantastic idea. Brawler allows you to add a couple more dice whenever you're in combat, and in close combat. And that is the direction the game is going, close combat. If you remember in the past, or at least in any of my bat raps, whenever there's close combat, nothing ever seems to happen. Nothing, 2 robots starts going in there and just start juking it out, and they never really kill each other. And in the last game that I had, we've only played the alpha rules once, close combat was actually fun. People engaged in it, and they actually shot each other, and that's something that you mentioned, shooting each other, is something that's going to change, because you can no longer do reaction fire against just movement. That is probably the biggest change that the new alpha rules have, and I lament that. I love being able to shoot at somebody out in the open, because that is a big shift in the game design mentality. It's going from simulationist, which is, you know, battle tech or squad leader, over to something more game theory, which is more like War Machine or arguably 40K. And that's not necessarily bad, so long as it's executed well. And because you cannot shoot in reaction for just movement, now you get a lot of tactical movements. People moving around, darting from cover to cover, and what we saw in this particular game. And they just tried to make a slow and steady advance. And you'll see a bat rep regarding this, that if in the same situation, if you have like a narrow alleyway where gears are jumping from one side to the other, the game can get locked down really fast in a reaction fire. As a matter of fact, you'll find that my doctrine, whenever I play the game, is usually to move forward, entrench myself, and wait for somebody to come in and just walk into the gun line. It works. It works surprisingly well, and it's not necessarily something that's really fun. As a matter of fact, most of the games, the kind of meta falls into getting the first forward observation token out, and then just punishing the guy for ever showing his head. That's not always fun. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. You could argue that our meta is about to move towards heavy tanks and stuff like that. I've done that. It's kind of fun. I mean, the Heavy Gear Blitz, I love it. It's a great game. As a matter of fact, all my bat reps recently have all been Blitz. And there's a reason for that, because it's a really solid system. And I love the reaction fire. But they're doing away with it. And they're replacing it with something that's a little bit more interactive. If you keep moving, you can't reaction fire to it. But just as the moment that they stop and they do something, this is a big change in Alpha Strike, it happens simultaneously. Hey. So now, if somebody turns around and takes a shot, the other gear can turn around and take a shot back at him. So long as that he's in 2 combat modes called braced, and he has to be standing by. Which, you know, it's another change in the rule set, because now they just assume that everyone is in combat mode. Awesome. You can pull up a lot of dice off the table. And it also just assumes that that if you didn't spend your action, you lost. I mean, previously you just had to kind of remember in Blitz who had an action, who didn't. Now, if you didn't spend it, you have lost it. It is gone, my friend. So there is kind of a gaming going on, depending on whether or not you took the first turn and then you immediately went into standby mode to take the shot. And it's a little gaming, and also it follows into your list construction, which again, this was kind of big in our last bat rep, because my brother, Defler, decided to take a list that was just one formation. The CO and his squad. Again, it's radically different from how they did in the past. He picked 6 actions worth of units. It was like 4 hunters, I think. Maybe a Jaguar in there, and then like 2 Grizzlies. Okay, that makes sense, right? And I picked 2 squads. I had a strike squad, which only had 3 or 4 actions. It was the bare minimum required. Yeah, it was 4. It was the bare minimum required for it to function, and then a GP squad to go with them. And I had 2 squads, and that's just where the little gamey bits of the system actually starts falling apart, or falling in anyway, because depending on who won the initiative, I either went completely first with my 2 squads, or he went first. He went with everything. He went with everything, and then I brought in my 2 squads, or I won, and then I had to move 1 squad. Then he moved all his stuff, and then I moved my other squad. It's kind of gamey, but it also falls into another problem. Commanders now get an almost infinite supply of command points. Now, this falls into kind of a war machine kind of mentality, where the commander pulls in amounts of command points for himself, and he can distribute it out to the people that he can see and is in autocomms distance of. Autocomms is now very important, because if it goes, now this is the alpha rules, it seemed kind of unclear at the time, but we assumed that if he was trying to go anywhere, or at least if he had to enact a comm event, that was his action. So if he's not an autocomm, he's got to get on the radio and contact that guy on the other side. So it gives you an incentive to keep the commander up near everyone else, but out of line of fire. And that was fantastic. He also gets his command points back every turn. So he only has a couple. So you have to be really picky about them. And then you have also squad leaders. He only had 1 squad leader. I had 2. And not just on that. So that we have 2 squad leaders issuing orders to their own little squads. The 1 squad on his side had just 1 leader, and he had to space himself all across the entire front. Oh, it was beautiful. It was great, because it follows into the next thing. They've changed how commanders work almost completely. They have to issue orders to their troops to be able to do things like initiate crossfire or coordinate their fire, stuff like that, and it was a lot of fun. I loved doing that. I had my squad commander just running up behind him, running out into the open, taking a look at the Grizzly. Screw that guy! And then immediately back off. Well, all the other guys, just a horde of Jaegers, really, just ran out there with their lax going ting, 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 ting. And the way they changed it is that it's an EW event or a comm event. that depending on how many successes the commander gets making that order, you get a number of tokens on the target that he just decided was going to ruin his day. And you get to re-roll as many shots as you want, so long as it's dedicated against that unit. And it's anyone within the auto-comm distance that could have heard the commander saying, that guy's going to have a bad day. That was really fun. I loved doing that. I loved having the commander up there, and it gave him a lot of personality. Before, in Blitz, you just have kind of a commander. You usually had an incentive to leave him back in the back somewhere, usually near a ECM gear or an ECCM gear, and that was it. But now, he's up there on the front, and he's just being awesome. Now, there's also an incentive not to do it. They changed the way satellite uplinks work. Satellite uplinks are your free eye in the sky now. You take a look from the top of the board, you say, I want to look at this guy, and then the commander makes a roll, he makes another comm check, and then he can pull in a number of units in his auto comm distance to immediately take fire support actions and do indirect shots at him, just as if it was forward observed. So now we see two different types of play strategy. My Southern commander's up there going, screw that guy! Well, his commander, on the other hand, was, you know, plugging up his Game Boy Advance or something, looking at some satellite data and saying, I don't like those guys. Hey, you Grizzlies, go screw them up, right? And it was really neat to see this difference in strategy, how the commanders were behaving wildly differently. And meanwhile, on my side, I also had a 2IC and the other squad commander, and they're on the other side of the board just kind of making a mess of things because they had all their extra little command points that they can just keep shooting out. Now, skill rerolls also changed. The rerolls have changed. Skill checks have also changed dramatically. The new change is whenever you make a roll, both sides reroll. It used to be in Blitz, and it was kind of, there's a little gaminess, you can say, that if you want to make a reroll, do you do it after he made his roll, and then you realize, oh, well, he rolled a 5. Well, what are my chances of getting higher than that? And then, you know, just doing the, you know, the soft math on it, and then just try it again. You can't do that anymore. Whenever you make a command check, the other guy has to make, well, not command check, but reroll. The other guy makes another reroll on his own. That's it. And I think that's awesome. It just makes things a lot simpler, and it's a lot less gamey. Whenever there's a reroll, both sides reroll. That's it. And it also forces statistical averages to start, you know, folding out. So if something really lousy happens, you can better bet somebody's going to either spend a skill point, which is what vet troops have. They just pull them around with them, and it's like a free command point that they can only use to reroll something. As a matter of fact, now that I think about it, I don't recall extra actions being a command pointable thing anymore. And then you get the reroll, and the reroll that comes from the commander is just fantastic. Again, only with an auto comms, or the poor commander's going, repeat fire on all center areas. What was that? Repeat fire on all the center areas, fall back 2 by 2, which can be jams, by the way. And no, you don't want to deal with that. No. Skill checks have also been changed. They're called, what are they called? They changed it from skill checks to, I think it's checks. Then you got tests. They're two variations of the same thing. The check, though, you take the number of dice, which is typically 2 for any gear, and then you modify. You get extra dice for doing different things. And you have 2 stats. You have gunnery and you have piloting. Piloting affects piloting skill rolls type things, leaping over hedges or dodging incoming fire, and gunnery affects how well you can shoot. And now, what you do is you take the number of dice that you normally have. So say we have a hunter firing at a Jaeger. He'd have 2 dice. Normally, if he stopped that turn and decided to brace, he gets another die, so he gets 3 dice. And that would be it. You just roll your 3 dice against the opponent. Now your opponent, the Jaeger, has a trait called Agile. As a matter of fact, all the trooper gears right now have Agile, which means that it doesn't matter if they're in light cover or not, they get an extra die. Normally you get an extra die for light cover, but if they're out in the open, they still get 1 die just to show that they're quick on their feet. So he would get his 3 dice. Then you roll off just as you normally would. You take the highest die out of either side, that's your check die. That's the one that's the highest. Again, this is similar to the normal Blitz game, but what's changed is that now the hunter has to compare his gunnery skill to it. And I do believe his is a 4+. So for every die after that that is a 4+, that is an extra success. And for the Jaeger, every die after which is a 4+ again, is another success. So there's some similarities to Blitz, but it's also very different. You get a lot of other little traits and modifications on there. Big vehicles have a flank trait, which means whenever they're shot from the side, you get to add more dice to the person that's shooting you. And it's altogether really, really fun. I mean, I really liked that. They divorced support points, for the most part, from the TVs. I think that was a great idea. Close combat is way more viable. Like I mentioned before, we had instances where close combat was actually happening. As a matter of fact, we had a moment when a Drake stepped on somebody, and it was awesome. Well, he fired a spike gun at him, and he did it from behind. He got like a flanking bonus. He was just bigger than him, and he had the brawl, and it was just all these dice, and the poor hunter just didn't have a chance. Decked in one turn. Speaking of decked, damage is done vastly differently. You have an armor rating for most of these units now, and now you take the penetration value of your weapon. Say that in that previous example of a hunter shooting a Jaeger, the hunter connects. Then you figure out, well, he's got a lack. I think the armor penetration, the penetration on it I think is a 7. Don't quote me on that. And then you take the number of successes that he had against the Jaeger, and then you just add that to its penetration value. So say it's 7, let's say you got 2 successes, now it's a 9. Then you compare that to the armor value of the Jaeger, which is, I think, 6. So that's 9 to 6. The Jaeger takes 3 damage. That's it. It doesn't get any more simple than that. I think he has 4 boxes of armor before he has 1 box of hull. Whenever he goes down to hull, he's crippled, and then whenever he takes his last hull point, the unit falls over, and he ends up becoming terrain, unless you blow through all the boxes at once, in which case it's overkill and he's just this fine mist across the field and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Speaking of which, you don't have to worry about out of ammo. I'm a little bummed about that, but that's just the difference in the design mentality. Again, we're moving away from simulation design to game theory design. What else? I think that's it. I love how commanders actually matter, and they have a lot of, there's just this real feel to them now. It's no longer just an opposed DCM role that might be the worst you ever have to worry about. Now they're actually up there in the front getting things done, and you just don't do it for lulzy purposes, because I've done that a couple times because it's fun, right? But in this case, there's a legitimate reason to do it. Things that I don't like, again, reaction fire is gone. That's reaction fire on movement, I'm sorry. Reaction fire on movement, I really like that. That really set this game out from other versions of Heavy Gear, because it always felt like you were in control of your turn even when somebody else was taking their turn. But objectively, a lot of times I've seen games where everyone spends their actions in reaction fire, and the game just quickly drags into an entrenched warfare, and it just doesn't, it's not as fun as it could be. Kind of in the middle, big armored units look like they're really useful now. As a matter of fact, in the past game, you will see the bat rep for it, we had a Drake, and it punched way higher than what I have ever would have thought that it would have done in a normal game of Blitz. I was never impressed with the Drake, but I ended up taking that Naga Wildcat looking thing that I used before, because the stat card actually kind of represents the Drake more than it does an Ash Naga. And it was awesome. I mean, it just kind of showed up and started taking names. And in that vein, direct fire weapons seemed a lot more useful. Indirect fire seems to be a bit nerfed. They lose a die just for being indirect. And if you indirect, and then you lose another one for being suboptimal, like a lot of these indirect weapons tend to be. So you're rolling with 0 dice. 0 dice. It's impossible to hit sometimes. So what happens is that the artillery piece almost invariably has to spend his combat posture as bracing, which gives him an extra die whenever he shoots. That works. But it also helps if he has a commander nearby to give him a reroll that he most desperately needs to do it. It does really seem like indirect fire is not going to be as prevalent as it did before. It's still effective. I lost plenty of units to indirect fire, but the sad reality is that there was instances where if this was a blitz game in the last alpha game that we played, the Drake would not have had a field day with it. There would have been a couple indirect ATM rounds and it would have been gone. So we'll see. We'll end up playing more alpha games to see if that is actually going to be the case. But anyways, that is my initial impression of Heavy Gear Blitz Alpha. I am actually very excited about it. The rule book right now is all over the place because there is no formatting. There's a lot of questionable does it not work in this particular instance kind of things that we're slowly working through, and they are updating all the time. As a matter of fact, I saw an update for it just a couple days ago, and I look forward to the finished product.